Hi, it's David here. This is the 5th video in the series that I've been doing on the structural creations that I've put into TSU, the Time Speaker universe, in order to imagine a world, a universe without bigotry, I guess, without specific targeted oppressions. This week it's ableism, and I've left it to last for for many reasons. One being that it's the newest one that I've been trying to add to the story, and two, it's the hardest because I haven't learned as much as I'd like to. But it's important. It's an important issue. Now, I'm still reading and I'm still learning, so you'll have to forgive me if I've got it wrong. But ableism seems to be based on the idea that unless a person's body works the same way as the so-called mainstream, there's the belief that that person's life isn't as worthy, worthy. And there's actually sort of an extra insidiousness underneath that assumption that, as an example, I have gone through a time when I couldn't walk without mobility aids. I'm still using a walking frame when I leave the house. But there was a point where I could barely walk. Post back surgery was pretty bad. And I was in a public space next to the mall in town, and a lady came up to me and said that I was very brave, and that if she had my situation, even though she knew nothing about my situation, that if she was in my situation, she would have killed herself. And this is actually why ableism gets me really mad. Like, other areas of oppression get me mad, but this one gets me particularly mad because the mainstream consciousness seems to believe that a life with a body that doesn't necessarily work the same way isn't even worth living. That, you bring in eugenics quickly, and it's gross. It's really gross. It grosses me out and I get pissed off, and because my life's pretty hard. I mean, poverty is actually the worst part of my life. But I have chronic pain issues, I have chronic mobility issues, I have a number of mental health issues from trauma, childhood trauma, and I'm probably autistic. So, my life isn't easy, but that doesn't mean my life isn't worth living, There's this underlying assumption in ableism that anyone with a body that doesn't work the way able-bodied bodies work, that we should not only not deserve dignity, but we don't even deserve to live. I mean, it's so gross, so disgusting. The problem, well, one of many problems, is that it's so endemic, it's so deeply entrenched in our culture that a lot of people don't even notice it. Like, along with fat phobia, it's sort of one of the few bigotries left that are okay in civilized society. And it's quite disgusting. I get, as I said, I get really angry about it. So I'm going to try really hard not to rant. Everyone has the right to live. Everyone should be able to live in dignity and not have half a society trying to kill them just because their body doesn't work the same way. I mean, a lot of those of us with chronic pain issues, it's difficult. It's not easy. I've had pretty much all of 2018, I wanted to die. I was in so much pain. But that doesn't mean other people had the right to tell me that I should die. Yeah, it's just gross. So I've tried to bring what I've learned so far about ableism into TSU. I'm still working on it, and I've screwed it up a couple times, but I'm trying to learn. It's a very big subject. I thought racism was big. Um, so my question that I'm trying to link all of these videos to with, what would the world look like without ableism? Or what would our world look like without ableism? And there's actually two sort of, well, three I guess, but two areas of culture within TSU. There's the culture on Planet Shadow, which is where the series starts. Planet Shadow has the agency who basically kidnap and or murder people if they're psychic, and enslave them, but they're all about pragmatism. It's about service to the country, patriotism, rah, 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 bullshit like that. And so if you can't serve in the function of defending the country, they consider you trash and they murder you. You're charged with incompetence and killed and executed as a traitor. And so they're very definitely ableist. When I realized this, I thought, oh gosh. And there are things I've done to mitigate it, but essentially, if you can't work in the way that they need you to work, they kill you. So the agency sucks. But beyond Planet Shadow, there's a big spacefaring. There's 48 planets, 20 of whom are a big aligned group called the Nexus Accord. And the Nexus Accord is spacefaring, and they've got ridiculous amounts of technology. They've got sort of a mixture of like 3D printer and the replicators from Star Trek, so they can produce food. So no one starves. Everyone gets mobility aids that they need, and you don't have wheelchairs, you have hover chairs, which are pretty cool. And so they've got the resources to meet people's needs and meet them on the level that they are, and creating room for people to exist in a form of, in a state of dignity and representation is easy in the spacefaring. But due to the nature of the agency on Planet Shadow, it's been tricky. And the rebels are homeless. They're homeless folks who live in abandoned buildings and fight the agency with, stones. So they don't have a lot of resources. But I thought the best that I could do in that context is that the culture they had before the agency, so it's 100 and so years ago in the story, they had equal rights. They had they didn't have ableism before all of that. So there's this sort of underlying pre-culture where they don't have ableism. They didn't try and kill people just because their legs didn't work or whatever. They looked after people with mental health issues, that sort of stuff. And so I've tried to write in, create in the universe more the attitude that's not ableist, if you know what I mean, rather than necessarily specific structural differences, because the structures for them, the resources in the rebels are limited, and the mindset of the agency is limited as well. But the agency is structured in such a way that it's very pragmatic, as in there's no emotional sort of kindness, and that they're pretty brutal because they're without feeling, culturally speaking. But like, if your character has the skills or the ability to do a certain kind of work, they just need some accommodations, the agency would give them those accommodations. So I have a character in Banshee Haven who's actually based on a friend of mine, a real friend of mine. Banshee Haven is the book where you spot the cameos of real people. It's quite fun, and it was the last book with cameos, unless they're part of the story. But her was Heron, I think. She's in Banshee Haven. She's a throwaway character, cameo, and her character gets shot in the back. But because her character is a seasoned combatant person and well trained and had a lot of knowledge about strategy and training and that kind of stuff, she was given a wheelchair and all the accessible healthcare things, and transferred to the training department, so she could help train new recruits. She wasn't just executed because her legs didn't work. And that's the best I've been able to sort of squidgy into the agency, because they're really harsh-minded. They're very focused on patriotism. You exist as a psychic person to be service to your country. And what that means in real terms is very, very variable depending on the context and who's enforcing it. But that's the sort of founding concept, that psychics on their own would be too much of a threat. So we have to create an organization that trains and houses and treats them like people in the service of the country. So the idea seems on the surface to be relatively reasoned, even if it's a gross breach of human rights. And in the current time zone of the story, completely horrific, because they just murder people. You're a traitor, bang, you're fucked. So instead of focusing a lot on the structural differences, because there's only so much you can do with the agency and the rebels, even Haven folks, there's only so much you can do with their current technology level. It has to be about attitude. I thought I'd explore it with characters. Now we get into a little life story of mine. When I was at high school, it was hell. I hated it, every second of it. There was a boy who was maybe 1 or 2 years younger than me. I can't even remember his name now. But he had some sort of developmental issue, and he was, 12, 13, 14 years old physically, but emotionally he was only about 6 or 7. I don't actually know what the name, if there is a name, but he was, he didn't emotionally grow up. He was also brilliant with computers. It was really funny. He had this cycle where he'd get bored and he'd be left in the library because, ableism, no one could deal with him. The teachers were just completely unprepared. So they just dumped him at the library, school library, and the librarian sort of kept him busy with books and drawing and stuff like that. But he'd get bored and the librarian would bugger off, like go away and do something. So he'd top on the computers. Now this was in the 90s in New Zealand. So computers were DOS games. I think at this point there wasn't even Windows. It was basically just DOS, and probably Windows 95 maybe, I don't know. But he could get into DOS and he would change all the passwords because he got bored. So he was brilliant with computers. I actually found it really amusing, even though I had to pretend that I thought it wasn't fair of him to do that. I'll get in trouble with the teachers. But I enjoyed hanging out with him because I spent a lot of time in the library because it was my only refuge from bullies. So I observed his behavior a lot. And so I put what I remembered from him, from the experience of interacting with him and talking with him and colouring, and I hung out with him a little bit, and watching him as he was, I'm bored. Heck, 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 heck. You can see it on his face. I'm bored. Sit there on the floor going, bored. And then the moment the other librarian left, he'd go up to the computer, tap, 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 tap. And then an hour later, the librarian would come back and try to use the computer and go, he's done it again. So funny. Probably not fair on the librarian dude, but funny. And so he had this sort of unique personality, and and I put him, or parts of him, into the story as the character Nada, who's one of the rebel kids. Nada's actually important later. He's technically a main character later on in the series, but he has the same sort of emotional developmental issue. He's like 5 or 6 years old in his heart and in his mind, but his body keeps growing. And so I explored what I remembered of that boy from school and how best to write kids, how best to write that difference. Inside you're only a small person, outside you're a bigger person. Trying to explore how to write him and how everyone else interacts with him in a way that's loving and kind and I'm not going to say right, but the way that it would be best to parent kids in this situation. Instead of, what we have is people bitching and moaning about how they're so much trouble and blah, 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 blah. Me, 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 me. The adult suffers, so therefore the kid has to. All of that kind of bullshit. Ableism. I wanted to explore what would be the appropriate response to his situation. I think I did it pretty well. I did a short story, which I'll make available somewhere, probably on my website, with Nada and his big sister, Jenna, having an adventure. It could actually be turned into a kid's book, but, well, maybe. Still got blood in it, so maybe not. But I wanted to explore other ways of interacting with people who are different. And I wanted to illustrate how behavior could change. Nama doesn't treat Nada like a different kind of kid. He treats all the kids with love and joy and kindness and dignity. And the rebels sort of they keep an eye on Nada a bit more than the other kids because he's more likely to get into trouble. He also tends to fall and break something himself or other things. And so the part of the story, and instead of the structural changes that I did with the other groups of oppression, for these I just played with it, looked at how someone would interact in a way that's not ableist. And Nada was my first go. I think I did it pretty well, and as I said, I'll share the short story with the kids, probably on my website, a link to it so it can be read. It's actually really sweet, I think. And I'd love to learn more. If I've done it wrong, or I could do it better, is probably a better word, I would like to know. I want to know how to create a world where people are allowed to be who they are, where they can live in as much dignity as humanly possible. But I'm trying with exploring. The next character that I used to explore stuff was Renata Yen, who is Nala's mother's sibling. I don't have an androgen name for uncle, so uncle aunt. Originally, Ren was created as just given the gender, male gender, and so he's still a he in my head. And Zay, Zia, Zem is actually really hard for me to apply verbally. I will try. So Ren is really old. Zay was born in 29, I think it's 25 or 26. So 80 years previous to the start of the story. The story starts in the year 3000, and Ren was born in 26, in the 20s. And there was a deleted scene from Rise of Hawk that I'm going to be editing this weekend and then sharing, hopefully, where Ren's got a heart problem and the rebels have to get Zim to the doctor at the cathedral. There's a clinic at the cathedral every week. So they're trying to get Ren to the cathedral, to the doctor who'll helps him and gives him pills and stuff. It was taken out because it wasn't needed, and Rise of Hawk was already like 120,000 words at that point. So I explored, as a person who's experienced chronic illness most of my life, I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that, the attitude that you get from able-bodied people who are ableist. There's this attitude that if you just try harder, you could be able-bodied, or that just existing is an inconvenience to everyone else. I guess the buzzword, the trigger word is burden. And so I wrote this short scene with Ren going to the doctor, showing how the others don't view them as a burden. Helping them to the doctor isn't a burden, isn't oh, you're being such a brat, being sick. There's none of that lip that you get with chronic illness. And I wanted to show that affection and love. I will probably edit it heavily this time because it's 10 years old, but it's all about the attitudes. When there's an ableist viewpoint, there's this attitude that just existing is unacceptable. The next two characters that I actually explored are in a, long story short, I need at least 2 projects to be doing at once, like writing and or editing, and sometimes a third project like writing or editing in the side because I get bored and I need to do something else. And one of my side project, my fun project, has been plotting a TV series set in TSU that's canon. And I've decided I'm probably not going to get rich and famous, so there's probably not going to be TV series, so I should just write these episodes as shorts. And in this series that I've plotted, most of it, there's 2 characters. They are siblings. There's Keaton and, oh no, not siblings, the family, the Hart family. Keaton is a young, I think he's 4. He's 4 years old. No, school age-ish at the beginning of the story. And I didn't realize it at first, but I created a kid with the same problems that I had as a kid. I mean, I realized that part, but I didn't realize that actually what I did was create an autism-coded kid. And so the story with him is, he is who he is. He is how he is. And instead of everyone bitching and moaning and expecting him to be something he's not, to get any kind of attention or love, they love him as he is. Even when he's falling on his face or not talking for 3 weeks or whatever. And so I created this kid who was like I was when I was small, and he's allowed to be who he is. And when he has a meltdown, it's okay, because he's having a meltdown. He's not doing it deliberately. It's not strategic, if you know what I mean. A lot of people think that kids throw tantrums or have meltdowns for drama, to hurt their parent, when most of the time a kid's just upset and overwhelmed, so they scream. And I got a lot of trouble for being emotional at all, and mostly from my extended family. My mum was pretty good with my foibles for the most part. Foibles. There's the internalized ableism there, particularly in light of the fact that I'm pretty sure I'm autistic. But so Keaton, I explored Keaton with a lot of the same problems that I had as a kid, a lot of struggles with sensory things, with talking things, with orientating body limbs, and processing problems and all that kind of stuff. And then in the story, in the plotting, I imagined how I would have needed, if they'd have known, if they'd have bothered to care, to notice that I wasn't being naughty, I was actually in trouble, I needed help, how they could have treated me. And I put that into the story. How would a non-ableist family react to a kid having a meltdown or running away or whatever? And I've only written the first 2 episodes, so I'm still exploring his character and how that interacts with the group. But so far, I actually really like it, and I wish I could go back in time and slap the adults in my life and say, you know, these are the things that are wrong. Stop screwing up your child or the child. But so I've explored what I've now discovered is probably autism in Keaton, and he's allowed to be who he is. When he has a meltdown, particularly an overwhelmed meltdown, they know how to calm him. They know how to show him affection without touching him or hugging him or requiring eye contact when he's overwhelmed. They know how to interact with him as a person on his level without any of the attitude and ableism and bollocks that you get from people these days here in this world. The last character that I specifically have played with is a character called Ania. And I've tried she's a deaf character in the series, in the TV series, and I had to actually restructure how I wrote the story, because I don't actually know sign language. I don't know any kind of sign language. I've always wanted to learn there's actually a te reo sign language, as in the Māori language. Because I go mute. I have sections of time where I can't talk, and sometimes I can type when I'm mute, but if I could sign, however you sign, I don't want to be like doing a swear word or something with my hands, I'd be able to communicate. And in a world where sign language is actually, well, in New Zealand, it's supposed to be the 3rd language. We're supposed to be 3 languages: English, te reo, and sign language. Not enough people know sign language. So I sort of created the structure earlier on. Okay, so the core sort of founding concept of the Nexus Accord Treaty, which is the spacefaring people, and in general for the Aramanan species, is that wars come from a lack of communication or a problem in communication. And so on Planet Shadow, but also on other places, they have this concept that in order to be as peaceful as possible, everyone has to speak one language in common. And I call it the common tongue. So the 5 nations have a common tongue. Haven has its own common tongue, and everyone who goes from Haven to 5 nations has to learn the 5 nations common tongue. But everyone knows the common tongue, like a multilingual, I guess. But everyone has to learn common tongue at school. But everyone has a language of their family that isn't necessarily the common tongue. It's part of also the racism and colonialism circuit, in that there isn't one dominating language. Everyone has their own language, and everyone communicates through the common tongue. And so, like, Nama would probably know the common tongue, obviously, but he would also know one of the Basan languages, because his great-grandmother was from Basan, and his grandfather would have been able to speak Basan, and so on. Yeah, so everyone agrees to learn one language, which is the common tongue, and everyone has their own language within their family or within their specific community. And I added sign language to that, so that everyone, at least in the agency and as much as they can in the rebels, would have learned sign language and the common tongue at school. Obviously, if they're illegal psi, as in rebels who weren't originally in the agency and escaped, they would have to learn sign language, because they don't go to school, so they wouldn't learn it unless they know someone who needs it. And so I made it so that if people went to school, they learned the common tongue and they learned sign language, so that when Anya escapes the agency, she can just talk with her hands. And it's not a big deal. Everyone can understand it, or are open to learn it if they don't understand. And so everyone's multilingual, and part of that multilingual is sign language, or a common tongue sign language. And so Anya, I actually found it really hard to write her, because I don't know sign language myself, and I mean, other than spelling, I think, spelling out a word, which I imagine must be really boring when you're actually, when sign language is your first language. I didn't know how to describe it. You can only say, talking with her hands a few times before it gets old. I mean, linguistically, you have to change how you describe, but if you don't know the symbols or the motions of the hands, it's harder. But I was trying to explore that in her character, and I'm going to continue exploring that in her character as I continue to write this series into short stories. And as an aside to the sign language thing, is I'm trying to figure out how to put captions, closed captiony things on my videos. I haven't figured it out yet, because YouTube's system is really, it's completely counterintuitive, at least for me. But I'm trying. I will eventually figure it out, or I'll figure out how to get the right software to embed it into the video myself and then upload it to YouTube, if that's possible. At the moment, it's just a bit too hard. Right, there's only 2 more topic-y bits. One of the biggest parts of the rewrite for Rise of Hawk and Time Speaker is the concept of madness. With madness, our culture associates it with bad things. If you have a mental health issue, you're immediately a threat. As a bonkers person, I've spent my whole life being told that people with mental health issues are dangerous or other, and I've had to hide. And that hiding PTSD and panic disorder and occasional bouts of delusion, it's not good. It's not good for you. But because I grew up, and I mean, we're still in that culture. We're still in that culture that whenever there's another freaking random shooting, everyone talks about madness and crazy people and making laws to stop crazy people from getting guns and shit like that. Which is an issue that's very complicated and is mostly rooted in white supremacy and the denial of the mainstream to acknowledge the racism problem. Because if it's a not white person, they're a terrorist. If it's a white person, same actions, they're just a lone wolf, a crazy person. And that's racism. But it impacts those of us with permanent diagnoses really badly. People begin to tell themselves that their mental health makes them a bad person. And yes, I know sometimes mental health issues can actually produce behaviors that can be dangerous or scary. But it doesn't make someone inherently bad. But because I've grown up in this ableist environment that believes that madness is a bad thing and automatically a threat, and I use the word madness in the context of the local group in Hamilton who say mad pride. It's a reclaimed slur, in my head anyway. That because I've grown up in that environment, originally the first two books, Rise of Hawk and Time Speaker, the first editions each had bits of ableism around mental health issues, which I tried really hard to change. Rise of Hawk still has a couple of instances, but I had to leave them in because they're somewhat part of the story. They're canon. I can't change them without changing 100 years worth of history, and lots of other bits and pieces, like there's a character called Trian Rena, and she's the head of research in the agency. She's one of the good guys in the agency, and her mother was a high-rated time psi, so she was a clairvoyant. And while her mother was giving birth to her, she was having visions of her daughter helping Hawk, helping, how do I say that without giving spoilers? Helping to fight against the agency, against agency values. And she knew that if she stayed alive, because she wasn't a telepath, if she stayed alive, a telepath would, when she got, because she got trapped in an elevator while she was giving birth, she knew that when she got set free, the next telepath would pick up her visions and execute her daughter, and probably her. And so she gave birth to Trian, fed her, wrapped her up, and then killed herself. And so the story, it links, because I don't remember how many canon-wise, but a number of times I did this, including Hawk's own mother. And so in the agency, there's this theme that being a high-rated time psi, being a powerful clairvoyant, means that you're crazy. And I had to change the words around it, because being suicidal isn't it's just being suicidal. It's not a complete disconnection from reality. So I had to change a lot of the words around it, but because it's so structural to the culture of the agency, and as a result also part of Asha and Hawk's relationship and friendship, because he's a high-rated clairvoyant, so she's always teasing him and keeping an eye on him about madness. And I had to rewrite chunks of Rise of Hawk to try and use better words, because crazy is a really bad word. I don't like it, even though it often comes out of my mouth, because crazy denotes not only unwellness, but a complete disconnection from reality, so that anything you say, anything you want, is irrelevant. It's a word that dehumanizes a person with mental health issues. And while, mental illness does disconnect you from reality sometimes, or a lot of the time, depending on your condition, that shouldn't actually dissolve all body autonomy. People are still people, even when they're, hallucinating and not even hearing you. I use the word bonkers because it's sort of a funny word. I see words as shapes and colours. And bonkers is sort of round and soft and bouncy, like balloons. And it's sort of playful. So for me, I use the word bonkers because it's funny, and it's a way I take the piss out of my own situation as a person with a permanent mental health issue to do with trauma. So in the rewrite of Rise of Hawk, I had to change as much of their relationship as I could without breaking canon, because there is actually, it's a theme. It's quite a deep underlying theme in the story of clairvoyance being thought of, at least by the agency, as being mentally unstable. It echoes throughout the entire story, even if it's not necessarily right in the front. And so I had to change words. I had to rephrase things. It took quite a lot, and I don't know if I fully succeeded, because there's a reason why Asha teases Hawk about madness, because she's keeping an eye on him. He does do a lot of stuff that doesn't seem to make any sense. She's not doing it as a discriminatory thing. She's not saying he doesn't have any rights or should control his body, or you're crazy, we're not going to listen to you. It's not any of that kind of discriminatory stuff, but she is teasing him. And that's not the only incidence of that theme. But when I realized that what I had originally created as a gentle tease could be read as quite discriminatory, it took a long time to figure out how to fix it. And that's one of the reasons why it's one of the main primary causes of me rewriting and doing a second edition. But in the agency of madness is it's a thing that is, well, it's discriminated against. Because of this history of time psi killing themselves, there's a worry, there's a fear, there's an underlying fear that who's going to be next. And I tried to gently smooth out some of the more harsher inferences in the story, because it isn't necessarily ouchy in the story, in the context of their culture, doesn't mean it won't be heard or read as ouchy in the real world. So I tried to minimize it as much as possible. But a part of my exploration of that, or at least when I realized that this was a theme that wasn't appropriate or was discriminatory, but I couldn't fix it, I couldn't just take it out, I figured out that what I actually needed to do was use it as a contrast with the rebels and the greater storyline with the Nexus Accord people, who are problematic in other areas, but they're really good with this sort of ableism. And so, as a heads up also to a few of my friends who have a condition called dissociative identity disorder, I have a character with DID, and Maya and Hene, or Hene, and she's basically tortured by her brother, beaten lots and lots, and he deliberately created DID in her mind. So she's multiple minds in one body. And the agency basically locked her up. They put her in a psych ward and threw away the key, which is why the agency sucks. One of many, many reasons why the agency sucks. But Hawk helped her to escape. And there's a scene in Bunchy Haven that I actually shared on Patreon. It's the winter solstice after the bombing, where Nama and the rebels, they all gathered together for winter solstice, a big feast. And through the process of that celebration, show that Hina and Maya are welcome. There's a little bit of period where they have to kind of get to understand her situation or their situation. So there's a bit of tension integrating into the larger group. But the scene shows that even though some people don't understand their situation or are a little unnerved because it's unfamiliar, everyone's welcome. Everyone is welcome in the rebels, particularly Nama's rebel group. He creates his rebel cell as a family, and he's basically the giant dad of the whole group. He even occasionally dads Hawk, which is really cute. And that image of Hina and Maya being locked up by the agency for being crazy, because she wasn't functional. They couldn't put her to work, and she was too high a rank to just execute. So there's the dynamic of the agency being, I guess, mainstream society, I guess, the place where you get discriminated and put in a box and told to act in a particular way with really negative consequences if you do not comply. So she gets put in a box, in a psych ward, in a box, thrown away the key for years. And when she escapes, she gets a little bit of justice, and the rebels open their arms to her, to both of them. And it's not only... I did the scene deliberately to let my friends and any future readers with DID know that they're welcome. They're welcome in TSU. But it was also a thematic illustration of the emotional feeling that I want to give to people who become readers of TSU. That if you're locked away in a box in society, in reality, in oppression, in poverty, in discrimination, that you're welcome. And that is the overall intention for TSU. I mean, I started writing TSU so I could survive what was going on in my life. It was purely for me. It was my joy, my love, my characters, my friends. But when I started writing it as TSU and wanting to share it with other people, that is the core of what I wanted to express. That no matter what's going on, because I mean, the rebels, if you look at their situation, they're screwed. I mean, they're trying to fight the agency. The agency has unlimited numbers, unlimited resources, the support of the government and the mundane society itself, the norms, which is probably an unfortunate term. But they're completely outnumbered, out-resourced. But it doesn't matter because they're free. They're in poverty, they have to run from the agency, they lose people they love because the agency finds them and shoots them. Or if they're young, kidnaps them. And they're in this horrific situation that's awful and horrible and terrifying. Kind of like how this year has been so far. All of these things they can't control, but what they can control is the sense of family, the sense of connection, the welcome. That no matter what they did in the agency, they can be who they want. They can be what they want. There's a character in the TV series, she's the first escapee, I think, actually. She's a painter. She loves art and colour, and she's a painter. But the agency put her into the morgue of a building that processes traitors. So basically, they bring captured people in, and they kill them, and then they put them down into the, or they go out and kill them, and they bring the bodies back to the morgue, and they basically process the bodies and put them in the furnace. So here's this beautiful, creative, joyous artist being forced to register the death of a person, sometimes children, with gory execution wounds, and then put them in the fire. And it's killing her. And so Hawk helps her get out. She gets a yellow sticky. Or should I say, a yellow sticky. And she escapes. And when she gets to this rebel cell, she's not expected to do combat. She's not expected, as long as she puts in like effort for or what she can for the chores, as long as she contributes in some way, she doesn't have to do anything. She doesn't have to fight the agency. Nothing. She can be what she wants. And I had this vision of the TV program. She would slowly start painting all of the walls of their abandoned buildings that they're living in. And so they would be living in this beautiful colour that she's created. And that would be the rolling theme. Her addition to the cell was wherever they end up living for however long, she's painting the walls with beautiful murals and colours and shapes and ideas and faces and just beautiful artwork. So they're living in an art gallery, essentially. I mean, an abandoned art gallery, but, you know. So that she's allowed to move forward as a rebel, but as herself, as she is. And there are some exceptions to that with TSU, because I don't want hate mongers in TSU. It's not for the mainstream specifically. TSU is for each and every one of us who are trapped in our box, trapped in jobs or worlds or homes that try and destroy our light and our love and our identity, that punish us for non-compliance. And TSU is the freedom. Reading the books. I always imagined someone in a terrible situation reading the books and even for a little while feeling like they belong, feeling like that who they are is perfectly fine, perfectly lovely, perfectly accepted. With the exception of people hurting people, you know, the people that think that who they are is to hurt people, I want as many people as possible to feel that way. And that's why I've spent years and years and years and frickin' years, literally decades, trying to create TSU to be that place for as many people as I can. And while I'm still working on ableism, and I don't know if I've pulled it off properly, and I still haven't figured out some other groups, and I'm still struggling with the reprogramming of the language to do with intelligence, which I own. I'm trying to learn. My process is imperfect because I am a person, I'm a human being, and therefore I am imperfect. But I've spent more than half of my life trying to create this universe, this writing universe for people who are trapped somewhere in a box, trapped by society or their family or their school or their peers or laws in the world, trapped, unable to be who they are. And TSU being the yellow sticky that helps them to get away, even if only for a little time. They can sit somewhere, curl up with a book, and for a little while they're allowed to be who they are. They're accepted as they are. They're welcome as they are. And I've been trying for 20 years to launch TSU, and I'm not particularly hopeful that it's going to work. I don't have any power, I don't have any money, I'm socially inept. So making friends is hard, and I can't seem to be popular online. I don't have the resources to have a studio and make perfect scripted bloomin' videos, but I'm going to keep trying. Not to be famous or anything, but to keep making those stories for people, so that even if I only find like 20 people who my books can help and reach out to and accept, sweet, that's helping people. Not to mention I'm going to write whether I share it or not, so I may as well share it where I can. I do hope one day that I can live off my writing, that I can, you know, go to conventions, you know, like Comic-Con. I'd love to go to Comic-Con. And talk about TSU and meet people and have large groups of people who read TSU and see, you know, cosplay and fan fiction. And I would love to have a big fandom, I guess. I don't know. I used to dream of being as big as J.K. Rowling, which is really sad and ironic. But those are daydreams. They're lovely, and it would be awesome if they happened. But my primary goal has to always be to try and make a universe, make stories where people like me can feel belonging, and even if only while they're reading that book, they can know that they're accepted, that they're welcome, and they're accepted, so that they have one fandom, one fictional universe where they're perfectly welcome, and where the author is actively trying to figure out how to be better with representation, with sort of political issues and the right term usage. And I'm trying, I'm doing my best. That will always be imperfect, but because I have chronic illness, I I have probably a permanent complex PTSD. My life is hardly perfect, and I am absolutely not able-bodied or able-brained some of the time, but I'm doing my best, and I want to reach out and share this world with people. So this is my last video in this series, and it's an hour, so I'm gonna stop talking soon, I promise. I will probably do more videos on the structural stuff, but this has kicked the living stuffing out of me, so at least there is a visual record of the big structural stuff that I've put into TSU to try and be inclusive as possible. There is a link in the description to my ebook. There's also an ebook of Rise of Hawk anyway. I'm also in the process of reading it in its entirety into a camera. I'm currently only just about halfway, but I intend to keep going until it's done. So even if you can't afford to buy the ebook, that's okay. You'll be able to at least hear the book. And I hope to see you again, or do more stuff, or hear answers, or hope for more additional interaction. Ara ni tasa.